why is space important? I was one of those people who probably didn't realize the impact that space was having on, every element of our life. And then once I started to understand the incredible opportunities that space hosts for humanity in terms of everything from climate monitoring to agriculture, food supply, communications, navigation, etc., I started to really understand why it was important to have cooperation. And then you add in all of the activity, this moment that we find ourselves in, where there's so much happening in space and so many different stakeholders who have the opportunity to engage in space, then it started to open up my mind to this whole world that it made sense that cooperation needed to be at the forefront. And I'm a person who I love international relations. I love thinking about how to bring different types of people together. And I love people. So people and impact have always been at the center of what I've wanted to do and worked at throughout all stages of my career. So it came from left field, but then it immediately made sense for me that this was something I wanted to contribute to.
Hey SpaceWatchers, this is Space Café Radio, your channel about trends, awesome events and interesting people in the space sector. Just before the Space Symposium in Colorado Springs started this year, I had the opportunity to meet with Hannah Ashford, the managing director of the Karman project. We used that opportunity to capture a short Space Café clip while we visited the breathtaking Red Rocks Theater near Denver. That was before the Karman Fellowship Cohort 2024 was selected, and I offered an in-depth Space Café Radio if the selection happened. And here we go. I'm delighted to welcome Hannah Ashford in our Space Café today. I'm Thorsten Greening, publisher of SpaceWatch.Global. Buckle up and enjoy this episode. Hey SpaceWatchers, and welcome to another episode of our Space Café Radio. And today I have the great pleasure to have Hannah Ashford, the managing director of the Karman project, here in the studio. Hannah, how are you doing?
Yeah, very well. Thank you, Thorsten. Thank you so much for the invite. I'm looking forward to having a chat with you.
So I'm reaching you in your office in Australia, right?
Yes, correct. I'm based in Australia here, and I obviously given the international nature of the foundation, I spend quite a lot of time in different countries around the world with our fellows and community members. But at this stage, I'm in Australia at this very moment. So nice to be home.
2 weeks back, news broke that you selected the new cohort. So please tell us who is in and what is special in the 2024 cohort.
So yeah, this year is the 5th edition of the Karman Fellowship. What we do is that each year we bring together 15 space leaders from all over the world to really try to build strong interpersonal relationships between them and really encourage them to look at the influence that each of them hold in their respective roles, ecosystems, and communities, and really think about what it is that they can do to shape a better future in space, and particularly look at that from a cooperative angle. So what's really important to us each year when the selection board is selecting the fellows is that they really look at having a very complementary cohort. So people representing different continents of the world and then also different countries around the world as well. And at different stages of their space engagement. So we really interact with people coming from large established space nations through to the emerging and non-spacefaring nations as well, to ensure that all of those voices are represented equally in the conversations and dialogue that we host. Like each year, I would say that this year has been a really nice coming together of fellows coming from all of those different countries and national representations. But likewise, we also ensure that there's quite a strong interdisciplinary mix. So again, we really like to engage with people coming from corporate space agencies, astronauts, for example, people coming from research and the arts, and ensure that they can all connect and really get to understand what is happening in each of their disciplines and regions around the world so that they can make more informed decisions. I think what's special about this year is that we have an incredible amount of geographic distribution and diversity in the cohort, probably more than any other year so far, and are welcoming fellows coming from different countries for the very first time. So, for example, we have this year the first fellow coming from Algeria, first fellow from Saudi Arabia. We have 2 fellows coming from Pakistan. So it's really important for us to each year really grow that community and ensure that we can grow the global footprint as well. I would also just say, I think there's no denying when you look at this year's cohort that the countries that they represent in terms of geopolitical situations and positions there are a number of quite polarizing political situations that are represented within the fellowship this year. But what is a really big aim for the Karman project is to ensure that we can build relationships that can transcend geopolitics and that we can really bring people together as humans who care deeply about that future of space. And in that sense, yes, we need to be prepared for how geopolitics plays into things because this is part of space as well and we can't shy away from that. But indeed, we're also really looking forward to doing what we can to build bridges between people coming from such nations.
So when you talk about the geopolitical situation, what are you referring to?
This year, for example, we do have a fellow coming from Russia. We don't have anyone coming from Ukraine, although within our wider Karman community, we do have people coming from that region, but I'm talking about this particular fellowship cohort itself. So what's really important for us as well is when we started the foundation, we thought, okay, what is happening in space right now affects everybody here on Earth, and the big decision makers are coming from countries that can have different geopolitical positions. So, for example, the United States and China, that was a very big, important bridge for us to be able to build. So, indeed, each year we really try to ensure that we have representation of fellows coming from those cohorts. Likewise, as you touched on, Torsten, obviously at the moment with what is happening in Gaza, it's also really important to understand what type of peace building efforts we can contribute to with our community. So, for example, we have a fellow coming from Israel this year who's very much focused upon peace building and bridging relationships. And I mean, when you look at the geopolitical situations as well, we have fellows coming from Pakistan and Saudi who also have strong geopolitical stances on what is happening at the moment in Israel and Palestine. So again, it's really important for us to ensure that we can bring different representations together, also with the acknowledgement that people don't represent the governments and necessarily represent their government positions at all. But if we can do our part to build bridges between people at a project level and really use science and space as a tool for diplomacy, that can also have some nice, strong flow-on effects at a wider societal level. So that's something that we're conscious of, and we want to ensure that we can host very safe spaces for conversation between people and really look at how we can engage in genuine peace-building efforts, particularly at a time for humanity, which is so challenging and, so particularly polarizing.
I see. Let's talk about the selection process, because it seems you put a lot of effort into putting this group together. So if you just can describe for us in the outside world how this selection process, how this board works. So can you give us some numbers that we can get a better understanding of it?
Yeah, of course. This year we received the highest amount of applications that we've received so far. So the foundation was founded in 2020. So each year we're managing to grow our impact and our recognition at a global level. This year we received just over 350 applications. So I think it was exactly about 360. And what we do is the first sort of round is with a shortlisting committee, and then those applicants are shortlisted to 50 applicants. And then those 50 are presented to an independent selection board that is chaired by Jean-Jacques Dordain, the former Director General of the European Space Agency, who's also on our Karman Board of Directors. And what Jean-Jacques does is he oversees a group of selection board members who we invite from all different nations and ecosystems across the world. And we really ensure that the selection board also reflects that diversity of disciplines and nations that we want to see in the fellowship cohort. When we get to the top 50 stage, that's really the foundation saying, you know what, we've looked at these people in relation to the criteria, and we really believe that any of them would be a great fit for the program. They're all professionally accomplished individuals working in, they've demonstrated significant leadership in their respective ecosystem or organization. They're people who have very astute critical thinking about the future of space. And once we get to that stage where we say all of these applicants, all of these 50 people are quite frankly brilliant people, we take that to the selection board. That means it is quite a tough decision, to be honest, because you're looking at a number of very accomplished professionals. So ultimately what they do is every applicant is assessed against 5 criteria, so we can really get an idea of where their sort of strengths particularly lie. And then it really comes down to a balancing of geographies and disciplines as well in that final decision. So looking at, ensuring that there is a nice cross-section of candidates represented from different disciplines, that they're not all sort of corporate representation or all agency representation, but that there is that nice mix of experiences and professions within the cohort. And we also look at that geographic distribution. So ultimately, getting from 50 to 15 involves, of course, we look at each candidate and the merit of that individual application, but there is that final balancing act that we go through.
Okay, so that's not like a tender process where everyone gets a rating or so, and then you select the first 15 for the group. Really comes with different views as well, as you say, the geographical distribution. Correctly understood?
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Are you feeling overwhelmed by the constant stream of dire climate news? Turn that concern into action. Tune in to the Climate Confident podcast every Wednesday morning when I bring you good news and real solutions from the front lines of climate action. Whether you're in business, tech, or just passionate about sustainability, the Climate Confident podcast is your weekly dose of optimism and inspiration. Subscribe to Climate Confident on your favorite podcast platform and start your Wednesday with hope and actionable insights.
I would say essentially there's 5 hard criteria that the fellows are all graded against. So of course that means that once we go through all of the grading, there is some type of ranking that appears. However, I think what's really important to note is that what we've also seen, of course, is that the selection board members are human and each of them rate rather differently. So in that sense as well, although we do get average scores for the fellows, and that can give us a good indication of, particularly looking across the 5 criteria, where people have consistently scored high across all of them, which means that they're well-rounded people who we really want to be in the program, who we can all foresee being great engaged participants. So of course, the scoring very much helps us to understand, okay, who has perhaps the most robust applications and which people are very clearly getting an incredible amount of support across the board from the whole selection board. But ultimately, there is this balancing act. But as I said, once people are really in the top 50, they're very accomplished. They're very brilliant people. And us as a foundation, together with the shortlisting committee, have already made that assessment that we believe any one of these people would be deserving of the fellowship. In that sense, it makes it both easier and harder because you sort of know that you're not going to end up with any type of bad cohort or wrong cohort, but it does mean that each year brilliant people miss out, and it's no reflection of their professional accomplishments or even the merit of that application. It just means that, of course, it's a highly competitive program and certain decisions need to be made to ensure that we're really thinking about how to bring this group together and what types of group outcomes we can possibly achieve when we bring particular profiles together. Yeah, I hope that explains it.
Yeah, absolutely. You talk about the entire selection process, the entire project with so much passion. But what is your own background? What brought you in?
Oh, thank you. I really am passionate about it. I think that I have one of the coolest positions in the world because I get to speak with and interact with so many brilliant people and thought leaders. And I feel like this role it's a type of role where you really learn something new every single day. And I find that very grounding. And I'm a person who really loves to learn. I think that also speaks to my background. I'm a lawyer by background. I started my career here in Australia working in litigation. And then I moved to Berlin in Germany. I had intended to stay for 1 year, ended up staying for almost 6 years. And it was in that move that I started working in the innovation and tech scene. So really looking at what types of disruptive technologies were out there and how they would affect societies. And a big part of my role in Berlin was bringing together different stakeholders for cooperative projects. So we were working with people coming from the investment sector, a lot of startups and entrepreneurs, people coming from corporate innovation programs, and also government officials. And that was across a number of different technologies. So space did feature in that world, but likewise, I was working on projects around climate tech and artificial intelligence and the future of transport and all different elements of the societal change that we're experiencing now from a technology perspective. And in that world, I came across space. Of course, I was interested in it because I had this natural human curiosity for space. But as somebody who didn't have a STEM background, I didn't really think that there was necessarily a place in space for somebody like me. I hadn't really ever considered a career in space. And then Helen Huby, who's the chair of our foundation, when she was starting the Karman project, she really wanted to build a team of co-founders who had that complementary skill set, again, coming from different worlds and really embodying that diversity that we try to replicate across all of our programs and community touch points. She reached out to me to see whether I would be interested in perhaps building this foundation with a team of co-founders. And it really struck me because I had to stop and think, okay, why space? I'm not engaged in the space world. So firstly, what can I bring to this? And then secondly, why is space important? I was one of those people who probably didn't realize the impact that space was having on, every element of our life. And then once I started to understand the incredible opportunities that space hosts for humanity in terms of everything from climate monitoring to agriculture, food supply, communications, navigation, etc., I started to really understand why it was important to have cooperation. And then you add in all of the activity, this moment that we find ourselves in, where there's so much happening in space and so many different stakeholders who have the opportunity to engage in space, then it started to open up my mind to this whole world that it made sense that cooperation needed to be at the forefront. And I'm a person who I love international relations. I love thinking about how to bring different types of people together. And I love people. So people and impact have always been at the center of what I've wanted to do and worked at throughout all stages of my career. So it came from left field, but then it immediately made sense for me that this was something I wanted to contribute to. Yeah, we all started building the foundation together back in 2020, just before COVID hit, and then launched the very first program during COVID, which was a challenge. But I think that in hindsight, I'm proud of the work that we did and managed to pull together. So yeah, it was quite an accidental journey into space, which also means that I've had to work particularly hard to upskill to ensure that I can really understand the different pillars of technology that are operating, the priorities, what is happening, again, that interplay between geopolitics on Earth and how that influences decisions in space. As I said, I'm learning constantly. I'm very committed to always continuously learning. I believe in lifelong learning just as a person. And I was also lucky enough to attend the International Space University, which also really helped me to get that grounding and that foundational knowledge of across the entire space sector. And that was also particularly helpful for making that leap into space in this stage of my career.
It sounds you would make the selection process very easy, being part of it, but now you're running it from the inside. Let's talk about the cohort 2024. What can they expect? We know who is in now. Tell all of us that are not in the cohort, what are obviously the majority of people, what they miss, what we miss.
Sure thing. So as a foundation, we have a number of different activities that we're running at all times, and the fellowship is one of them. The fellowship is really the core of what we do. It's the bread and butter. It's where we put most of our resources as a foundation. In terms of the year coming up, with the fellowship itself, we start with a series of online engagements because obviously they're all over the world. So that means we have people joining from, I think it's about 6 a.m. in the US right through to, I'm always the last time zone here in Australia. So it's always midnight for me when these meetings start. But we really bring everyone together and we provide opportunities for them to do a couple of things. So firstly, we really provide space for them to think about and revisit their intentions at this stage of their career. So really thinking about, okay, what impact have they made up until this point? And what impact do they want to create? So what are the topics that they really care about? What keeps them up at night? Where do they see the potentials in space? And then we try to identify the overlaps and the particular synergies that exist between people in the cohort in that sense. We also really work with them on some leadership training. So things like responsible and ethical leadership. So understanding, again, that the decisions that people make now in space will have impacts 10, 20 years into the future and beyond. And it's important for people to, if we can help to provide them with some type of framework for how do you make decisions that can have many competing factors and how do you do that with the best interests at the core of that decision-making process. Again, understanding that interests will be measured differently according to the objectives of whatever project it is. But if we can start getting people really thinking about the responsibility and the impact that they can have as an individual in a position of responsibility and in a position of leadership, then that's something that we really want to invest in. And then what's really important beyond the online engagements is that we have in-person opportunities for our fellows as well. So, for example, each year we host a program together with the University of Oxford. That's not just for Karman Fellows, that's also for the pioneers, so the people who I mentioned before who are in the top 50 each year. We recognize that these are incredibly talented, highly motivated people. So we really want to create opportunities for them to start engaging with our community and our partner community as well. We do a program with the Uni of Oxford each year where we bring a delegation of 10 international leaders to Oxford, and we have a week within the Said Business School really looking at economics and the future of space and what's happening at the moment and where all of these different puzzle pieces fit together. And then beyond that program, we also have a big in-person engagement each year called Karman Week, where we bring together that year's cohort of fellows. So 15 leaders come together in one location. Last year, we went to the Maldives, for example, and worked with the Maldives Space Research Organization to create a program that was very much focused upon space for sustainability and capacity building, so really responding to those local needs. And that's a model that we decided to follow this year. So we put out a call for hosts across the world. We received 9 applications from different host countries, and we made a decision. It still hasn't been made public, but it is in Eastern Europe this year. And what we'll really be looking at is how we can create a program that is focused upon education and capacity building, and how to ensure as well that, when we tend to think about space in Europe, there are obviously, I think that Central European narrative really sits at the center, which is, of course, a reflection of the significant member states of ESA. But what we also really want to do is look at, okay, how can we expand that European cooperation to include more of the countries within Eastern Europe? And then also, how do we build up this next generation of talent? And what are the different innovative mechanisms to do that? Even if we're talking about a country that doesn't have an established space agency, what is it that other stakeholders in that ecosystem can do to start building up that talent pool? And yeah, we're really excited to take the program to the host country this year. And I think particularly when you look at the track record that this country has achieved in the absence of a space program, it's really quite remarkable. So more on that soon, but I think it will be a really nice, as always, when you bring people together, it's going to be a whole heap of incredibly talented, brainy people together in rooms for 5 days. And we do a lot of activities. We do a lot of dialogue that is also led by the fellows, so they can really bring the topics to the forefront that they care about. And there's just so many incidental moments in that period where true friendships are formed. We do cultural activities, and we really make sure that the fellows just have time to get to know each other as people, because we hope as well into the future that those relationships will really help, particularly if we do face times of conflict or the tougher decisions. If people have trusted counterparts across the world, that can be a really powerful thing.
You talked already about the values, the vision, the mission that you have with the Karman project and with the fellowship. Can you give our audience a few hints to concrete projects that came out of this melting pot of brilliant minds that you put together every year?
Yeah, of course. So I would say that there's 3 objectives when we bring these people together from an outcomes perspective. So the first, we really look at individual outcomes. So again, understanding that these are people who have that in decision-making positions, they have a high level of responsibility. So the first thing that we really want to come out of it is people to take more responsibility as individuals for the decisions that they make. So we've had a number of different individual projects that have come out of the Karman project. Often they're led by the passions and the real cares or the geographic needs that these fellows represent. We work as a foundation across 6 different impact themes. So we really look at how space can affect things like sustainability, education, empowerment, governance. So we use those as guiding pillars to make the fellows think about, okay, what orbit do they really care about? Or what part of our world can they have a positive influence in? And how can we work with them to identify, okay, what resources do they already have at their fingertips? What networks do they have at their fingertips? And how can they start to implement things now in their existing positions that can have positive benefits for people on Earth or for the future of space? So, for example, we've had people like Prateep Basu, who was actually one of our very first fellows, and in 2020. And what Prateep did was he's the CEO and founder of a company in India called SatSure. And they're working with a number of different data points, publicly available data points from satellites around the world. And they use artificial intelligence and some bespoke algorithms to really make sense of that data to help serve different communities across insurance and climate and things like this. And what Prateep saw was that in India, there were a whole heap of farmers who could very much benefit from better access to weather data sets and more accurate forecasting. So as part of his fellowship commitment, he started a sort of a non-profit sector of his company that really looked at open sourcing different information to this particular demographic and also helping to understand, okay, how to really use that data in a day-to-day sense. So really looking at the literacy of satellite data and how we can bring that down into tangible, actionable data that people can make decisions off, everyday people can make decisions off. And then likewise, we've had a number of individual projects around education. So people really looking at how they can use that influence to invest in the next generation. So we've had people like Lynette Tan in Singapore and Pierre Bertrand in France, who have both started additional nonprofits as well, really looking at investing into next generation and creating challenges and opportunities for them to engage in space and start to think already at that sort of high school or early university stage, how space can play a role in their societies and in their communities and also in their lives into the future. And then I think the second thing we look at is group outcomes. So again, when we bring this sort of group of very interesting people together, what can they actually achieve together? So we've had some projects, for example, at the moment, some fellows from our 2022 cohort are actively working on an international payload together that they will fly. And that's something, for example, you have fellows coming from the United States, from organizations like SpaceX and NASA, working with counterparts from China and Rwanda and Austria, all coming together to look at, okay, can they create this payload? It's a biological payload, but what that also represents from this international cooperation perspective and really modeling and showcasing cooperation in action. So that's one example as well. And then we have some other fellows from last year who really came together to say, okay, you know what, in space at the moment, there are civil society organizations who are taking an incredible amount of responsibility for the future of space governance. So how can we create more support towards civil society organizations within space? How can we increase the understanding in other elements of civil society, bring in stakeholders from climate and food security and help them to understand the importance of space to all of their organizations and decision making? So they're really looking at embarking on a large scale project around awareness building and also funding mechanisms to support civil society and its development in space. And then beyond those group projects, we also have foundation outcomes where we say, you know what, we have access to this incredible brains trust of people all around the world. And that can be really helpful in terms of, again, supporting robust decision-making at that executive governance level. So we, for example, have been invited on a number of occasions now to work with different bodies of the United Nations to give recommendations. So, for example, with United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs, UNOSA, looking at how we can also leverage the experiences of our different Karman fellows to give recommendations around capacity building and best practices for building that next generation of the workforce. And then we've also worked, for example, with UNIDIR, so the United Nations Institute for Disarmament, on some recommendations around space security. And most recently, we were also invited to contribute to this sort of in the lead up to Summit of the Future, the Lisbon Declaration, which I'm sure you know about, Torsten. We really advocated to have greater civil society representation in decision-making in space. So the fact is that the challenges that we face as an international community now require a new level of involvement from non-state stakeholders. So we really advocated for having more multilateral representation and systemic engagement of civil society in space to ensure that the people who are making the decisions in UN COPIUS and all of the different working groups that are facilitated by UNOSA have a strong input from experts and people who are really experiencing the day-to-day of the space world all around the globe. So that was something we advocated for, and we were also really happy to see that it was adopted in the Lisbon Declaration. So really looking at creating this more ingrained avenue for civil society to partake in executive decision-making. So yeah, we really look to leverage our position as a foundation to advocate for certain things that we believe are important for a safe and secure future in space.
What's up for this year? So what is the outlook for the next months to come? Are there any particular events where people can meet you and the Karman project?
Yeah, of course. On the Karman project side, the next month, so we have the Oxford program happening in July, and we also have a number of people from the UK ecosystem who are invited. For example, we have dinners and different things that week. So there's some opportunities to partake. So if anyone's interested in knowing more about that cooperation between Karman and the University of Oxford, there's an opportunity there to come and meet with us and meet with some of our leaders. And then we also, as you mentioned, we'll do the announcement about the Karman Fellowship Week. It will be at the end of September this year, and we're really going to bring people together. We'll be at the IAC in Milan, so we host our annual flagship Karman Futures Gala dinner there to bring together different stakeholders in space to really step out of their day-to-day and start thinking again about what they can do towards the future of space. And then additionally, I will personally be at the Space Sustainability Summit in Tokyo next month, together with Space Tide. So yeah, really looking at how we can also continue to increase our representation in that Asia Pacific region and ensure that we're engaging proactively, particularly on matters around sustainability. So working with the Secure World Foundation and the Sustainable Markets Initiative, for example, and some projects around that. So at any one time, there's a lot of different projects happening, a lot of partnerships. And we're really looking at how we can create the best experience for the fellows. So another thing we're really focusing on this year is how to provide opportunities for our fellows to educate each other on what's happening in their world. We're really looking at increasing that geographic understanding between them so that people, ultimately, if you're making a decision now, as a leader in the United States, you have a very good understanding of what is happening in the Asia Pacific or in continental Africa or across Central and South America, and then vice versa. So we want people all around the world to understand what is happening in other regions of the world so that they're making more informed decisions in their respective roles.
Hannah, thank you very much for your time and for this wonderful interview. We are looking forward to hear from you and from the Karman project much more in the future, and good luck for the next steps.
Thanks so much, Torsten. And thank you again to SpaceWatch for inviting me. Always happy to have a chat with you guys.
If you have further questions, reach out to us at radio@SpaceWatch.Global. If you like these or other episodes of Space Café Radio, leave us a rating on your preferred podcast platform. It is the currency of today. And if you want to stay on the pulse of the space industry, please visit our website at www.SpaceWatch.Global and subscribe to our newsletters. And of course, don't forget to become a Space Watcher. I'm Torsten Triening, publisher at SpaceWatch.Global, your independent perspective on space.